The year was 1913, and Oklahoma Territory still felt half wild, half tamed. Dust rolled through the streets of Dry Creek, a settlement of barely 2 dozen homes, a feed store, one church, and a saloon that doubled as the town's gossip hall. Life was steady and slow, until the day a wagon appeared on the southern ridge, creaking beneath the weight of wooden crates. The driver was a woman, slim, pale, and alone. Her name was Clara Hensley, and she bought the old Whitmore farmhouse, a house no one had lived in since the Whitmore tragedy 10 years before, when a fever took the entire family. The house had sat empty, windows boarded, as the prairie wind howled through its chimney like a lonely ghost. Now smoke rose from that chimney again, and light glowed from its windows. The people of Dry Creek noticed, and they whispered, "No husband, no children, just crates," and those dolls she brought with her. The first time Martha Bell saw Clara up close was at the general store. Clara wore a long gray coat, buttoned to her throat despite the heat, and gloves that looked hand-stitched. "Afternoon, Miss Hensley," Martha greeted, smiling politely. Clara's lips curled into a faint, careful smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Bell. I'm told you bake the best bread in town." Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but her eyes, there was something unreadable in them. They seemed to notice everything: the dust motes in the sunlight, the creak of the floor, even the heartbeat of the room. When she left, old Mr. Turner behind the counter muttered, "That one's seen sorrow. You can tell by the way she looks at things, like she's memorizing them before they vanish." Within a week, children began to whisper stories. They swore they saw shadows moving behind Clara's windows at night, tiny silhouettes that didn't quite move like people. Soon Clara began working as a seamstress, advertising her services by pinning a handwritten note outside her gate. Clothing repaired, dolls mended, memories restored. People hesitated at first, but her work was too fine to ignore. The sheriff's wife brought her torn lace gown. The preacher's son brought his ripped Sunday trousers. Clara's stitches were near invisible, the work of a perfectionist. Inside her parlor, the walls were lined with shelves. Upon them sat dolls of every size, porcelain, cloth, even carved wood. They were beautiful, almost too lifelike. Martha Bell once asked, "You must love dolls, Miss Hensley." Clara smiled faintly. "They remind me of the people who've left us. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them breathe." Martha laughed uneasily, thinking it a joke, but when she glanced back before leaving, one doll's eyes seemed to follow her to the door. In August, the air grew heavy with heat and thunder. 9-year-old Annie Cobb was the light of the town, freckles, red ribbons in her hair, and a laugh that carried across the wheat fields. One evening she ran to the river to catch fireflies. Her mother called after her, "Be back before supper." Annie never came home. By nightfall, lanterns dotted the fields as men searched. Dogs sniffed, boots trampled the mud. But morning came, and no trace of her was found, only a single shoe by the riverbank. 3 days later, Sheriff Albert Graves rode past Clara's farmhouse. On her windowsill sat a doll, dressed in a faded red ribbon, freckles painted delicately across its porcelain face, and green eyes that looked exactly like Annie's. People whispered. Martha Bell said aloud what others only thought. "That doll has Annie's face." Clara was summoned to the sheriff's office. She came willingly, calm, holding the doll gently in her hands. "I didn't harm the child," she said. "I made this to comfort her mother, so she might have something to hold on to." But Mrs. Cobb fainted when she saw it. The likeness was too real. The same eyes, the same tiny scar above the lip. Rumors spread like wildfire. "She makes them from the dead. She's a witch. She takes their faces." Children no longer walked by her home. Men avoided her gaze. Only the wind dared whisper to her porch. At night, travelers said they saw flickering lights in her windows, like candle flames dancing in a circle, and sometimes soft singing, too faint to be sure it was real. A month later, another child vanished. Eli Turner, 10 years old, had gone fishing alone. His pole was found stuck in the mud by the Red River, the line still tugging gently with the current. That evening, a farmer riding home saw Clara standing knee-deep in the river, her skirt soaked, clutching something wrapped in white cloth. When he called out, she didn't answer, just turned and walked toward her home in silence. The next morning, a new doll appeared in her window. It had Eli's brown eyes, a faint smile, and one single painted tear rolling down its cheek. By sunset, the whole town was whispering again. Sheriff Graves had had enough of rumors. He saddled his horse and rode to Clara's farmhouse at dusk. The parlor was dimly lit, filled with the soft scent of lavender and wax. Dolls of every kind stared from shelves, their faces serene, almost human. "Miss Hensley," the sheriff said, removing his hat, "I need to ask where you were the night Eli Turner disappeared." She met his eyes calmly. "Here, sewing. You can ask my candle. It's a better witness than most men." "I'll have to look around," he said. "Of course," she replied. "I've nothing to hide." He searched every corner. Nothing strange, except for the quiet hum in the air, like distant music. When he reached the stairs, he noticed a door at the top, sealed with a heavy padlock. "What's up there?" he asked. Clara's smile faded. "My husband's things. He died. In St. Louis. I've not had the heart to open it." Something in her tone stopped him from pressing further. He left uneasy, the sound of whispering seeming to follow him out the door. That night, the sheriff couldn't sleep. The padlocked attic burned in his thoughts. Why would a widow keep a locked room untouched for years? He returned secretly before dawn. The farmhouse was silent. He climbed the porch steps, the boards groaning beneath his boots. Through the window, he saw Clara asleep in her chair, a half-sewn doll resting in her lap. He almost knocked, but then he saw it. On the parlor wall hung a sketch, dozens of faces drawn in charcoal. Some he recognized: Annie, Eli, and others who had gone missing in nearby towns over the years. And beneath each face, one word: remembered. The sheriff backed away slowly, the hair on his neck prickling. He didn't tell anyone what he saw. Not yet. Days later, a letter arrived for the sheriff from St. Louis, a reply to his inquiry about Clara Hensley. It told a tragic story. Clara's husband, Thomas Hensley, had been a renowned doll maker, known for his uncanny realism. But after their only child died of scarlet fever, he grew obsessed, trying to make a doll so lifelike it could capture her soul. He experimented with strange materials, chemicals that hardened like skin, and glass eyes tinted to reflect light like real ones. One night, his workshop burned down. Only his hands were found, fused around a porcelain mold. Clara left the city soon after, with his tools and unfinished creations. Autumn came harsh and early that year. Thunder rolled across the prairie, and rain fell in relentless sheets. That night, the townsfolk of Dry Creek awoke to a sound that froze their blood. A scream cutting through the storm, high, childlike, and echoing from the direction of Clara's farmhouse. Martha Bell clutched her husband's arm. "It's her." Dear God, it's her again. At dawn, a thin column of smoke rose from the chimney. When Martha went to deliver bread later, Clara answered the door as if nothing had happened. Her eyes were calm, her voice gentle. "Busy night," Martha said nervously. "Just finishing a piece," Clara replied. Inside, the parlor smelled of burnt wax and lavender. Dolls lined the walls as always, except one, placed in the center of the table. Its face was smoother than porcelain, its eyes shining wetly in the light. When Martha asked who it was meant to be, Clara simply said, "Someone who was very lost, but is at peace now." Martha left trembling, her basket forgotten on the porch. The days after the storm were tense. The townsfolk avoided Clara's lane entirely, as if even passing by her gate would summon something unholy. But one person couldn't stay away: Sarah Lee, a curious girl of 12, bold as brass. She had always been fascinated by Clara's dolls, the tiny lace dresses and delicate painted lips. That afternoon, she crept up to the farmhouse window. Rain still dripped from the eaves as she peered inside. What she saw made her gasp. A doll sat on the mantel, face tilted downward. As Sarah watched, a tear rolled from its porcelain eye, leaving a faint wet trail on its cheek. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran all the way home screaming. Her mother stormed to the sheriff. "You said you found nothing wrong. My girl says that woman's dolls cry real tears." The sheriff sighed. He'd been trying to keep the peace, but the town's fear was building like thunder behind the hills. That night, even he dreamed of dolls whispering his name. By Sunday, the church was packed, not for worship, but for judgment. The preacher slammed his Bible shut. "Evil hides behind kindness," he warned. "And when the devil wears a gentle face, we must still cast him out." A murmur of agreement filled the pews. "She took my boy," cried Mrs. Turner. "And my Annie," sobbed Mrs. Cobb. Even those who doubted felt their fear outweigh reason. The sheriff tried to speak. "We don't know she's done anything wrong. There's no proof." "Then we'll find proof," interrupted a farmer, gripping a torch handle. "We'll see what she hides in that cursed house." By dusk, the crowd had formed, 20 men and women, torches blazing in the wind, hearts full of fear they called righteousness. They walked toward the Whitmore farmhouse like soldiers marching into a war of their own making. The wind howled across the open field as they reached the edge of Clara's property. Her house stood still and silent, candlelight flickering behind the windows. When they knocked, she opened the door without hesitation. "I know why you've come," she said softly. "Then make us understand," the sheriff demanded. She held a doll in her hands, a little girl with red ribbons in her hair. "You see monsters because you're afraid of what you don't understand." A woman in the crowd shouted, "You've stolen children's faces." Clara looked down at the doll. "No, I've saved them." Then she stepped aside. "Come in. See for yourselves." Reluctantly, they entered. The room glowed with the light of a dozen candles. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with dolls, faces so lifelike that even the bravest man felt a chill run through his spine. The sheriff whispered, "Good Lord." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "They are the forgotten ones, the lost, the ones no one came looking for." She moved to the shelf and gently touched the cheek of a doll with glassy blue eyes. "This one was found by the river 5 years ago. No one ever claimed her." She turned to another. "This boy was buried under the bridge after a flood. They called him John Doe." Each doll, she explained, was made using a strange preservation clay her husband had invented before his death. A mixture that could capture the imprint of a face in perfect detail. When the townspeople stopped searching, I didn't. I found them, the forgotten, the abandoned. And I gave them faces again, so that they might be remembered. The sheriff stepped closer. "You mean these dolls are made from—" She shook her head quickly. "No, not from the bodies, from their memory. The clay remembers the face of what it touches. I only used what remained." The crowd stood frozen, torn between fear and heartbreak. Clara walked to her sewing table and lifted a small leather-bound journal. Inside were pages filled with drawings, maps, and names, dates, locations, rivers, fields. "These are where I found them," she said, pointing to red dots drawn along the map of the Red River. "Long before you cared to look. Some had been there for months, years." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He had led many of those failed searches himself. She looked at him with sad eyes. "You think I'm a monster, Sheriff, but I'm only a keeper of what your world forgets." A long silence fell over the room. The only sound was the soft ticking of a clock. Finally, Clara spoke again, her voice trembling. "The dead speak to those who listen. I only help them be seen again." The sheriff ordered everyone outside. "Let me speak to her alone," he said. When the room emptied, he turned back to Clara. "If you truly found those children, you could have told someone." "I did," she said quietly. "But no one believed me. Not when I was a widow. Not when I said I could hear them." He studied her, her pale face, her trembling hands, the weariness behind her eyes. She wasn't mad, he realized, just broken and utterly alone. She handed him a folded paper, a list of names. "If you don't believe me, look by the river, near the willow trees. That's where you'll find the truth." That night, the sheriff didn't sleep. Her words gnawed at him until dawn. By morning, he gathered a few men and rowed out to the river. Spring rains came heavy that year. The Red River swelled, bursting its banks. When the water receded days later, it exposed things buried long ago. Pieces of clothing, small bones tangled in roots, half-worn shoes, exactly where Clara had said they would be. The sheriff stood on the muddy bank, staring at the evidence. He removed his hat and whispered, "Lord, forgive us." The bodies were real. The children had been taken, not by Clara, but by time, by carelessness, by the river itself. And she had found them all. He rode back to her farmhouse immediately. But when he arrived, the house was silent. The door hung open, the candles burned out. On the table sat one last doll, small, pale, and unmistakably sculpted in his own likeness. After that day, no one ever saw Clara Hensley again. Some said she fled into the hills. Others swore she drowned herself in the river she loved so much. But on still nights, travelers passing near Dry Creek claimed they could see candlelight flickering in the windows of the old Whitmore house. Children told tales of a woman's shadow gliding past the glass, carrying a doll in her arms. And if you listened closely, they said, you could hear a lullaby, soft, sweet, and sorrowful. "Sleep, my child. The wind will keep your memory safe, though earth may weep." Those who heard it said the dolls moved ever so slightly, turning their faces toward the light. Years passed. The Great War came and went. Then, in 1925, a young boy got lost in the woods near Dry Creek during a storm. His name was Peter Nash. For 2 days, search parties combed the countryside. Just as hope was fading, the boy stumbled into town, dirty but unharmed. "Who found you, son?" the sheriff asked. The boy smiled faintly. "A lady. She had silver eyes. She said her name was Clara. She told me to follow the light from her doll's eyes, and they'd lead me home." The sheriff froze. "What did she look like?" "Sad," the boy said, "but kind. She said she missed her little girl." And then he added quietly, "She said the dolls aren't scary. They're just lonely." The sheriff said nothing. He just looked toward the empty farmhouse on the hill, where a faint glimmer flickered in a broken window. In 1933, during the Dust Bowl, a couple traveling westward stopped near the remains of the old Whitmore farmhouse. The walls had collapsed, and dust covered everything inside like time's own blanket. The woman, drawn by curiosity, stepped inside while her husband waited outside with the wagon. On a small table in what had once been a parlor, she found a single surviving doll, its porcelain cracked, its features faded but peaceful. A folded note rested on its chest, written in delicate aging script. Not every soul lost is gone. Some just wait to be remembered. The woman felt tears rise unbidden. She held the doll gently, brushing away the dust. For a moment, she thought she saw the faintest flicker of a smile cross its face. Outside, the wind howled softly through the broken house. But to her, it almost sounded like a whisper. "Thank you." She left the doll on the table, untouched, as if afraid to disturb its rest. As she walked away, she glanced back once more. Through the shifting dust, the faint outline of a woman seemed to stand in the doorway, pale, calm, holding a small child's hand. And then, as the wind rose, both faded into the golden haze of evening.